oh, you know, we don't need the fat, we can suck out a lot of fat and get a lot of these mesenchymal stem cells. So this one's the fat, and the other one is the umbilical cord. You've probably heard about umbilical cord stem cells, and so they're being used as well. Next slide. So that's kind of an overview of the trials that are happening. I want to tell you a little bit about the science and a little bit about the kind of decisions that one has to make, we all have to make, when you're thinking about clinical trials. So this is kind of the medical, it's a medical problem, it's a human problem, it's a biological problem. So there's on the top left an image of a spinal cord in a human, a little butterfly shape there where the cells are, and around that, the darker part, that's the white matter where the conducting nerve fibre pathways are going up and down the spinal cord. And then the spinal cord injury could look like any of those other sections. So these are slices this way through the spinal cord. The B, the one in the middle there, shows what happens, what the cord looks like a short time after spinal cord injury, and then the others a long time later. So one thing about spinal cord injury is that there's the physical damage itself, that's bad enough, but then what follows after that is a lack of, or inflammation, which is good, which is never resolved properly. You know, when you cut yourself, it all goes red and nasty, and you get all this inflammation, and then it heals up. So what happens in the spinal cord is that for some reason it gets into the inflammatory phase, and that continues. So that this, what we call secondary degeneration, it accounts for probably 90% of the physical injury that you end up with. So there are several issues there, and separate from putting cells in, certainly separate from cells in the chronic injury, if you could stop that inflammation, you might be able to stop a lot of the subsequent lack of recovery. But it also affects, when you're putting cells in there, you know, you could put them in a very inflammatory environment. Is that good? Is it bad? Are the cells going to help the inflammation? That might be a reason to put cells in there. It might be a reason to put bone marrow cells in there. They're part of the immune system. So that's some of these both technical problems, biological problems, trying to solve it, and then you've got to think about, well, when's the best time to put the cells in? The best time, if you've got a chronic spinal cord injury, the best time will be now because you've had a spinal cord injury, but is this particular cell going to do the job that you want it to do at the right time because of the either inflammatory environment or later on the non-inflammatory fixed scarred environment? Next slide, please. So this is a picture showing you that the little bunch of dark part there, middle there, that's showing you an illustration of what relatively what the primary lesion might be. It's going to be much bigger than that usually, but then the white section in the middle shows you the secondary degeneration, and it gets lots of inflammatory cells in there, and as the inflammatory cells attack the cells of the spinal cord, then those cells die and they release toxic compounds which kill other cells, and it's this kind of cycle that happens, and it'll eventually, if it hasn't damaged originally, it'll then hit all of those conducting fibres to cause the lack of sensation and motor effects below the lesion. Next slide, please. And so then, once the injury has happened, and as part of that recovery, then you form a scar, so that the cells of the nervous system form that scar around there. So the cells proliferate lots more and make a barrier. It seems to be both a process to lock out the inflammatory part in the middle of it. It's all shown there in yellow, and it's and as well as those cells proliferating, they also put lots of proteins out there. So it's a bit like a scar tissue on your skin, only it's going to stop nerve fibres growing through that. So some cells that you put in there might be useful for helping these nerve fibres regrow, to regrow through that, through the scar tissue. But not all cells will be able to do that. So each cell that people think about using for a cell therapy would have a different job in this very complex both prevention and repair process. For example, mesenchymal stem cells might be good for that inflammatory process. The Geron trial that I'll be talking to you about later is one to make new cells here, so that during part of the injury, these cells which insulate those nerve fibres are lost, and so the nerve messages don't get past the site of injury. So those embryonic-derived oligodendrocyte precursors were there to replace those insulating cells that allow the conduction of nerve impulses. Olfactory and sheathing cells that our trial, they help the nerve fibres grow through this damaged area. And so you just can't say, well, just get any stem cell and whack it in, you know. You've got to think about what the job it's going to do is and what stage the injury is. Next slide, please. Here's another issue that comes up when you think about a clinical trial. These graphs show you where somebody's clinical ASIA score is after if they're diagnosed at the time of the injury, where are they a year later? So a year later, you can see that 80% of, these are 3 different bars for each of those graphs represent 3 different studies showing you, but basically this one here is 80% of the people with ASIA A are diagnosed as ASIA A year later. So those are complete injuries. But nevertheless, some have recovered to ASIA B, even to ASIA D. And you can see this is, if you started with ASIA B, some have got worse and most have progressed. ASIA C, most have progressed and so on. This illustrates a couple of things. First of all, it illustrates that there is a recovery process, so that that speaks to the risk of any kind of cell therapy, because if there's a recovery process, you don't want your intervention to lead to people going in this direction and not allowing them to go in that direction. It also speaks to something else, and that's the history of clinical records in spinal cord injury, because historically nobody can do anything about spinal cord injury. This history was not really taken, so that people came in, they were treated in the spinal units. And really this kind of treatment has only been happening since about the Second World War. Prior to that, people were just taken home and there was very little treatment at all. But we actually know very little about the clinical history of people with spinal cord injuries, and there are moves around the world now to set up registers, including